Hey, it is great to see everyone this morning. We hope you have managed the cold and the snow and all that successfully. And those of you with young children who have been with them for extremely long periods of time in closed spaces, we hope you come to us this morning with your sanity, or maybe we'll provide some sanity for you. So today we're continuing our series on your mark. If you have your Bible, we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12 this morning. Hebrews chapter 12, that's the passage we're going to be in through this entire series, Hebrews 12 verses 1 and 2. If you don't have a Bible with you, you can use the Pew Bible in front of you. If you don't have one at all, that's our gift to you. Or as always, you can go to bcnazarene.org/gatherings. And if you missed what happened at the start of service, the video that we show before the message throughout this series is actually a video game that you can play. And so, oh wow, that was a great guess. So if you go to bcnazarene.org/gatherings, you can hop online and play that. But if you play the video game on bcnazarene.org/gatherings during the message, while you're supposed to be looking at the Bible, we will track your IP address. And I don't know how to, I'm just kidding. I don't even know what IP address means, something computery. So here we go. This is Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. And it says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne." And so if you're with us last week, we talked about this idea of running a race that matters, running a race that is truly significant. And that for each one of us, we didn't say like, hey, this is the finish line, because for each one of us, that finish line is going to look a little different. But the reality, the things that are in common for our races, is that a race that matters will be run towards Jesus, because he is the champion of the race that is the most significant and the one who initiates and perfects our faith. Now, as we move throughout our races, they're going to all have some like subtleties. They're all going to have some variables, but there are those things in common. And if you're paying attention, or if you're familiar with this passage, there is one word in that grouping that we looked at last week that should, catch your attention, should cause you concern. And I find it right here. He says, "So let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." Now, if I'm reading that for the first time, and all of a sudden he's going, hey, you need to run a race that matters. Jesus is the champion of your race. Don't run a race that was just handed to you. Run the race that God gave you, whatever that looks like, with your unique station and relationships and abilities and talents. But you're going to need to do it with endurance. I'm going to go, why are you saying that? Like, why are you stressing so much that my race needs to be run with endurance? It's kind of like you're getting on a roller coaster and someone is like, are you sure you want to ride? I'm like, I was. I'm not so positive now. You're at a restaurant and you go, I'll take the hot wings. And the waiter or waitress goes to you, they go, would you like milk and bread with that? I'm like, maybe I don't want the hot wings. Like it's like cause you concern. Like, hey, you're gonna run this race, but you need endurance. When I was looking at different races, I was studying races in prep for this series, and I came across, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, the race is called the Barkley Ultra Marathon. And it is the most unique race that I have ever seen in my life. The Barkley Ultra Marathon, it's a 100-mile race. That's too many. If you cut off both zeros, I may be in, but it's a 100-mile race. You have 60 hours to complete it. Way too long. So 100-mile race. And it's like the runners, the race starts, only 40 people get to run in it a year. The race starts somewhere between midnight and noon. And how the runners know, they're all like camped out in a tent the day of the race. And the race organizer blows a shell and makes like a horn sound noise, and that's how everybody knows. That's 1 hour before the race starts. Only 18 people have ever completed this race. 18 people. The race has been going on for 40 years. 40 people a year running it, and only 18 people have ever completed the race. And then I saw the tagline for the race. This is the tagline for the Barkley Ultra Marathon: the race that eats its young. Now, here's the thing, like, if you're looking at that and you're going, oh, Barkley Ultra Marathon, you've got to run in it. Like, oh, what is it? It's the race that eats its young. I'm going to go, oh, no. Like, the race that you get to eat while you run, I'm in. The race that eats its young, no thank you. That's not for me. And so in a similar way, as the writer of Hebrews is talking here, he says, like, hey, you need to run this race that matters, but you need to do it with endurance. They go, okay, so why? Why do we need endurance in this race? And it's because there's obstacles. There's things that are a part of the race that matters that God has set before you that are difficult, that are hard. And here's the thing, this is how the writer specifies it. These are not things that are thrown in front of us. This is how he clarifies what the obstacles are. He says, let us strip off. That's the key word. Let us strip off. It's not dodge the obstacles in the race, not avoid, not run around the obstacles. What he's saying is the greatest obstacles that you have to the race that matters are things that you carry with you. Now that's a new idea. So let me let that sit in for just a second. The most dangerous threat, the person who is the greatest enemy to you running the race that matters, is you. Not someone around you, not a bad influence in your life, not your parents who keep telling you what to do, not someone who lives in your house who's a constant frustration to you, and you wake up in the morning, you have a good attitude and you have a good perspective, and then you see that person and it completely goes away. No, that's not what he says. He says the greatest obstacle for running a race that matters is you and the things that you carry with you. So here's my bet, is that there is no one who has thought worse things about you than you. You have probably had more negative thoughts about yourself than anyone else in the entire world has had about you as a cumulative total. You have probably done more to sabotage your own success than anyone has actively done against you. As we say, hey, we need to run a race that matters, but the obstacles for this race are the things that we carry with us. And then he identifies two sets of obstacles that I want to talk about. So the second one, we're going to do this in reverse order. So at the end, or closer to the middle of verse 1, the end of the passage that we're looking at today, he says, the sin that so easily trips us up. So, could I hear you say, sin that trips us up? Okay, so this is the sin that trips us up. The sin that trips us up are the things that we do that are wrong, that have a tendency to keep us out of the race that we are supposed to run. Now, here is, I just want to be abundantly clear, because I don't want you to miss this. The message of Scripture, the message of Jesus is this, is that you are saved through no good action of your own. You are saved because of what God has done for you on the cross. And so it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't no matter how many wrong things you do. It doesn't matter how many right things you do. Your behavior is not what matters. It is accepting the gift that God has given you. And so because of that, it doesn't matter what you have in your past. God is still going to use you. That it doesn't matter what wrong things have taken place in your life, that God is going to take those things and he's going to work them together for the good of all those who follow God, so other people will come to him. And that's what we believe as a church wholeheartedly. But there is another side of that that we don't often talk about that needs to at least be mentioned. And that is this: while grace overwhelms and is abundant in all of our lives, the things we do wrong still have consequences. And my fear is sometimes, and I don't think we can overemphasize grace, but my fear sometimes is that because we only talk about grace, that we never also talk about that, like, you have decisions that you make in your life that affect your future and the future of those around you. And that if there is sin in your life, it will trip you up from the race that you're called to run. So let me give you an example. When I had the opportunity years and years ago, when I was a youth pastor at a church, the pastor who I worked for is a wonderful man. We were good friends, and I thought he was doing incredible things, and he was going through a difficult time, and he had sin in his life, and he had an affair with a member of the church, and he's no longer in ministry today. Now here's the thing, God is still using him. God is still working in his life. God is still using him to bring people to him in the work that he's doing. But he's not running the race that he wanted to run and he felt like God had put before him. And we need to acknowledge that. And we need to be aware of that. That if there is sin that is continuous in your life, it will trip you up. And you need to get rid of it. The Apostle Paul, he said it like this. This is how he talked about the diligence with which he focused on training for the race he's going to run. This is what he said in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. Look at that first part. I discipline my body like an athlete. Like, when you look at like your life of faith, is there any sense of that level of intensity that Paul is talking about in the way in which we approach our own spiritual lives? Because like when we read our Bibles, when we pray, are we just like, are we there? Or are we like, as Paul's talking about, discipline my body like an athlete? And what he's showing us in this moment, he goes, hey, this is hard. Like, it is hard work. This is where we get the call at the beginning. It's going to require endurance. And if you thought the sin that trips you up was hard, he makes it even harder. So that's the first obstacle, the sin that trips us up. The second one is this. He says, let us strip off every weight, because the weights will slow us down. Would you turn to your neighbor? Tell him, weights that slow. Oh, we were very subtle on that. So the other week, we're driving down. It is like a balmy 2 degrees, I think, as we're driving down the road. And there is someone outside running. And I was just like, why? I don't understand. And so I'm sitting there in my vehicle, and I've got my winter coat on. I've got my hat on. I've got my gloves on because sometimes the steering wheel gets a little chilly and it's hard to hold on to when it's that cold. I've got I am bundled up to a T, and this lady is running down the side of the road, and she's wearing a long sleeve shirt and a puffy vest, and that's pants. Just to be clear, it's pants. Who is that? And she's just going, and it's hilarious. So all my kids wear winter coats, hats, gloves, every single one of us. We're not even going to play outside. We're just we're going out to eat because we didn't have any food in the house anymore. And so we're bundled up to a T for the 4 seconds that we're going to be outside, that we're going to run in. And so we just it was, no one said a word. We just watched this lady as we're at a stoplight slowly run past our car, and we're just like, what? Why? And the thing I was I just looked at her and I go, she has no coat. It's 2 degrees. She has no coat on. And it was amazing. And here's the reason. There's a reason why. Those of you who are runners, you know this. There's a reason why she wasn't wearing a coat. Because the coat slows you down. She didn't need it because she was running. She had some other layers. She didn't need a big bulky coat because it slows you down. This is the part of faith that we don't often talk about. We'll talk about the things that are wrong that can trip you up, but then there's this whole other category that the writer introduces of the weights that slow you down. Not things that are wrong. That's not what he's saying. Not things that are wrong, but the things that will slow you down from the race that you're called to run. And that's a level that we don't often look at. So let me just jump right to the application of this. It would be a shame, and I've got no other word for it than that. It would be a shame if you got to the end of your race and you didn't do what you were called to do because you spent too much time on Netflix. There's nothing wrong with Netflix. Like, Netflix is fine. But wouldn't that just be the worst to go like, I could have done this, but I spent all my time binge watching seasons of The Office over and over again. I could have done this, except I log just an obscene amount of hours on Facebook scrolling through posts. Like, wouldn't that just be the absolute worst to go, I didn't accomplish what I was called to accomplish. I didn't run the race that was set before me, not because I did anything wrong, but just because I had weights that slowed me down, that I wasn't diligent about, that I didn't focus on. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying, he's saying this is what it looks like to run the race that matters. To run the race that God has set before you is to be mindful of the sins that trip you up and the weights that slow you down so you can run the race that you're called to run. Now, few of us, my guess would be, are willing to go to that level of intensity and to that degree in order to actually run a race. And this is my fear in terms of the myth that we fall under. So let me say it like this. If you go to a track meet, are you necessarily running the race? No, absolutely not. Like, you can go to a track, have your running shoes on, have your running gear on, you can be stretched out, you can be ready to go, and you can like have everything there. You can make your own number for yourself that you pin on. That's a little weird, please no one actually do that. Like, you can go through all those steps and still end up sitting in the bleachers yelling at the runners as they go by. And you're fully prepared to run the race, but you're not actually in the race. And my fear sometimes within the church as a whole today is that's the trap that we fall into. Is we're standing in the bleachers yelling at the runners going by, assuming that we're actually running the race. And what the writer is saying in this passage, no, if you are not aware, if you are not diligently getting rid of, laying aside the sins that trip you up and the weights that slow you down, you're not actually running the race. And then he tells us why we should jump into this. This is where it gets fun. So Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1, he says, therefore, if you're fun, this is kind of a cheesy little Bible statement. My imagination is that most of you have heard this before. Anytime you see the word therefore, you need to know what it is. Oh, good. Like 12 of us did that. That's awesome. So he says, hey, when you see the word therefore, you need to know what it's there for. So he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. And so let's look at that huge crowd of witnesses. We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11. This is the crowd of witnesses that the writer is talking about. So let me put this in full context. What he's saying right here is he's saying to run the race that God has put before you, to pursue Jesus, who is the champion of that race, you must be intensely getting rid of the sins that trip you up and the weights that slow you down. And the reason why you should do this, okay, so he's giving motivation. The reason why you should do this is in light of the huge crowd of witnesses. And this is what he talks about. Hebrews chapter 11. He says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gift. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God, and it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. And then he continues, and we're not going to read all of this. But the writer tells the story. He tells the story of Noah. He says Noah was in a spot in which it had never rained. And God told him to build a boat to save what was left of humanity, and he did that. Noah took this incredible step of sacrifice by faith and build a boat that would save the animals and save his family because of the faith that he had. And then he tells the story of Abraham. It says Abraham took and he left everything that he knew, his father, his family, the land that he was familiar with. This is in an age before GPS and Google Maps and all those other things. And he just said, go. And Abraham went, where? And God went, that way. And Abraham said, okay. Could you imagine that? Like, I can't make a right turn in an area that I'm slightly unfamiliar with without my phone telling me that that is the correct turn to take. But could you imagine not knowing where any of the land in the world was like, and God just going, go that way? Got it. And he did. He tells the story of Sarah, who waited her entire life to have a baby. It wasn't until she was in her 90s and she trusted what God had promised to her, and then she finally had a descendant. He tells the story of Moses' parents who defied an order of Pharaoh and hid their son when Pharaoh had ordered all the baby boys that were born under a certain age to be killed, hid her son in defiance of the king, of the Pharaoh of the land, as a way to spare her son because they knew what God had promised them. It tells the story of Moses, who goes against his upbringing, being raised in Pharaoh's household to lead his people out of slavery. He tells the story of the Israelites, the people of God, who Moses led out of slavery, who in this incredible moment walked through the Red Sea as the walls of water were split between them. Can you imagine that? Like, I'm not gonna lie, in the first moment as I'm there and the Red Sea gets parted and the walls are split on each side, like, I'm pretty geeked out, there's no lie. Like, I'm gonna be pretty like, oh, this is good. And they go, walk through. Like, I'm halfway through and I'm going, oh, we're too far to get back. He said, no, they marched through confidently, knowing that God had done this and that he had a plan and a promise for them. And here's the point of it, is he tells all these stories. And in each one of these stories and in each one of these accounts of people's lives, what he is showing us, is the writer is showing us, is that there are people who have gone further in their faith, who have gone deeper in their relationship with God, and who have sacrificed more than you have. And they would say that it's worth it. They would say that it is worth it over and over again to run the race that God has called them to. And so when we get in moments in which we go, hey, this is like really hard. I feel like I'm being called to sacrifice a lot. Like I feel like I'm having to give up too much to live this life of faith, whether it's friends that I need to leave behind for a season to pursue what God has called me to, or other areas of my life. Like, I feel like it's too hard. What the writer is telling us in this moment, he goes, more than Noah? Like, did you sacrifice more than Noah, who spent his entire lifetime building a boat when people had literally never seen rain before? Can you imagine explaining that to the neighbors? What is that? It's a boat. Why are you building the boat in the middle of dry land? Because it's gonna flood. From what rain? What's rain? Like that goes over well. So when you're in moments in your life in which you feel like you're being called to sacrifice too much, he's saying, no. Noah went further. Noah sacrificed more, and he would say it's worth it. When you're in moments in your life and you feel like the promise that God has for you, like the way in which you thought things were gonna turn out, isn't happening soon enough, he's saying, no, remember Sarah, who spent her entire lifetime waiting for a descendant, for God to only come through in her 90s. Have you had to be more patient than Sarah? Because here's the reality, is she waited longer and she would say that it's worth it. You say, I'm just scared, like, to take this step, to actually act on my faith, to move out of the bleachers and to get on the track, removing the weights and laying aside the sin. Like, that's gonna be really hard. I don't know if I can do it. And what the writer is saying here, he's going, harder than what the Israelites did. walking through an entire sea that's waters were parted on each side, wondering the entire time, are these walls of water going to come crashing down upon you? And he's saying, no, these people, they went further in their faith. They went deeper in their relationship with God. They sacrificed more than we have, and they would say it's worth it. Like, look at that distinction. Like, when I talk to people who run, no offense, people who run, okay, this will be interesting. When I talk to people who run a lot, and I've talked to people who like run marathons, how was it? Awful. Sign me up. Like, that's not happening. I'm like, I don't want to do that. You're not giving a glowing review of what it costs. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. He's saying, no, here's the deal. What we have before us is we have people who've gone to the ultimate extreme in their faith, who have believed God for everything that he said that he was going to do. And they would tell you it's worth it. They would tell you it's worth it to run the race that matters. And then the writer closes with, I can only describe it like this, the most interesting motivational speech I have ever read in my life. This is what he says. This is in verse 32. I don't want you to miss this. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. It says, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death, but others were tortured. Refusing to turn to God in order to be set free, they placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half and others were killed with a sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. Man, that really got bleak at the end, didn't it? Like when he started and he's like going through that first part and he's like, they shut the mouths of lions. I'm pumped. Like I'm really excited. Quenched the fury of flames, put whole armies to flight. And then it switches in verse 35. Look at this. The verse doesn't even change. In verse 35, it says, women received their loved ones back again from death, but others were tortured. Like this isn't, we're not talking like there's not new section heading, chapter doesn't change. It's the same verse that we move from women received their loved ones back again from death, and others were tortured. Here's what I have found is one of the greatest enemies or obstacles for you running a race that matters. And we'll just call it like this, situational analysis. And it's this tendency, and in some ways this is a really good thing. It's the tendency to just look around and to determine your faithfulness by your present circumstances. And I want to be clear in this, if I can kind of give the waiver first. I think it is a good thing to be aware of how our actions affect ourselves, those around us, and the world that we live in. If all your relationships are crumbling before you, you may need to change something. Like if you keep ending up in the same spot, job after job after job, that your boss is dumb and your work is stupid and no one really gets it, it's probably you, okay? Can we just be clear on that? It's probably you. But here's the really hard thing, is there's another side of this. And I wonder, say, for Sarah, who God had promised that she would have a descendant, how many of her neighbors told her she was dumb? I wonder for Noah. Like, we're aware of this. How many people laughed at him and mocked him and made him out to be a fool? For Moses, how many people would have told him, Moses, don't leave Pharaoh's household. Like, you have everything. Don't turn and go do this other thing. And here's my fear, is that when you run the race that God has put before you, there are going to be times that your race does not make sense. And the only thing that you're going to be able to hold on to in the moment is what God has called you to right then. Like, if I can make it a little more clear, parents, there are going to be times when you are raising your children in which you're just going to go, I may have gotten it all wrong. Maybe they should have been with someone else because it's not working right now. From what I've gathered, this is for daughters and sons, anywhere between 15 and 22. It's kind of that gap is the most significant part of it. But like, there's going to be times that you're going, I don't know if it's worth it. There's going to be times that you're trying to lead a friend to faith, and you're going to be going, I may not be the right person. And all you're going to be able to hold on to in that moment is an understanding that God has called you to this race, because in the moment, the circumstances are going to tell you to give up, and it's not worth it, and it's not reality. I watched this. I watched my wife minister to her friend over 8 years. 8 years of inviting her to church and talking to her about God. And I gotta be honest with you, like, we want a 1 week return on that, don't we? I invited them once, they came, they accepted Jesus, they were baptized, their life is made new, then they went to Africa to be a missionary the next day. We did it. We expect that kind of a turnaround so often in the things that we're doing. He's saying, no, here's the deal. He doesn't give two categories. This is writing, he doesn't go like, hey, these people who shut the mouths of lions, they did what God had called them to. Others who were tortured, they kind of screwed up. That's not what the writer says. It says, no, some of them got to see God's fulfillment in the life that they were living, and others went through the most difficult, excruciating circumstances, and they still kept their faith. And so run the race that God has called you to, even if what you look around and see doesn't tell you to keep going. And so here's my encouragement to you this morning, is no matter where you are, no matter what you're running, no matter what you see around you, is to endure in the race that God has set before you. To endure. That means it's going to be hard. That means there's going to be obstacles and it's going to be difficult, but it also means that it matters. And some of you, you've been following Christ for a couple months, maybe a couple years, and this is what you're experiencing. Is you felt when you accepted Christ's invitation into your life, you felt this wave of enthusiasm. But there's a tendency over time for that wave to die down. And what has happened is you have this new life that you've been promised, but you continuously feel the pull of your old life. Because maybe your habits or behaviors or decisions or friend group haven't changed. And so you constantly feel this pull back to the life that you are currently living, even though you've accepted this new life that God has promised you. And I want to encourage you, endure in the race that God has set before you. Don't go back to the other life. Like, endure. It's going to be hard, but I promise you it matters. We have a crowd of witnesses who have gone before us who would say it is worth it. And so endure. Others of us, we've been following Christ for years, for a long time. And what has happened for many of us is our faith, which at one point in time, long, long ago, was exciting and passionate and enthusiastic, and it was all we could talk about, has grown stale and cold and tired. And what happens within this is we're not necessarily doing anything wrong. We don't necessarily have a lot of sins that trip us up. We may have a lot of weights, but we're just kind of going through it. And what will happen is we'll have these moments of clarity. Maybe it's in a conversation or during a song that we're singing or a prayer. And we'll have these like moments of clarity, these moments of inspiration of, no, this is the person I want to be. And we'll see ourselves and we'll just go, that's not where I thought I would be in this moment. The personality, the character that I have, that's not what I thought it was going to be. And we'll have these moments of inspiration and go, yes, that is what I want to pursue. And what happens every single time is we'll have these moments of clarity, these plans we put together, and we immediately jump back to our other life and everything is exactly the same as it was before. And here's the deal. I want to encourage you. Follow that. Like, follow the inspiration that you feel deep within you, because that is God placing that there. Your dissatisfaction with present circumstances is the Holy Spirit working in your life, calling you to run the race that you're called to run. And so endure. Like, don't let yourself fall back into the easy work of the habits that have always been there. Form the life that you were called to live and endure in that. Endure. Others of us, you followed Christ for your life. Like, we're not talking months, years, decades. Like, it's been your life. And we talked about this last week. We said the reality is this, is you don't have a ministry. You are a ministry. It's the person that you are and what you bring in everything. And I would like to encourage you in this. You can retire from a career, but you cannot retire from a calling. It's not something you get to give up and place aside, because it's what God has called you to. And so I want to encourage you, even though I'm nowhere near where you are, to endure. To understand that you may have more days behind you than days in front of you, but that doesn't mean that God isn't still preparing you for something incredibly significant in the days and time that you have left. And I don't understand why we accept this idea within our faith that because society tells us that our peak years are somewhere between 25 and 40, that the peak years in our faith are exactly the same, because that is absolutely not true. What we see over and over again is we see people in their 80s and 90s be the people who God has placed at significant moments in the life of faith of a community to lead them forward into an area that is scary and unknown. And my call upon you is to do the exact same thing. Don't retire. Endure. Years ago, when I was part of a group that planted a church, we saw this incredible initial success, and it was unbelievably exciting. And then it got hard. Like it did. It just got really hard. And we kept growing, and we kept adding people. We saw people come to Christ. We saw people get baptized, but it got really hard. And one time I was having a conversation with one of my good friends who was there at the very beginning of the church plant, and he had just kind of drifted off. He wasn't present as much. He wasn't emotionally present as much. He wasn't enthusiastic like he used to be. And I just had a conversation. I said, "What's going on, man?" And he was so honest, and I appreciated that. And he just goes, "I'm just really sick of church people." Where's the amens on that? I'll say it again. I'll give you a chance. He just said, "I'm just really sick of church people." Yeah, there you go. And I looked at him and I said, "Me too." But my faith isn't in church people. Church people didn't call me to do this. God did. And so I'm not going back. I'm not giving up. Because while difficult, this is the race that matters. And so my encouragement to you this morning is that your race is going to be hard. And it could go either way. You may be able to look back and tell the story of, I shut the mouths of lions. I quenched the fury of flames. Or your story may be, I was imprisoned. I had yet to receive what God had promised. But either way, the crowd of witnesses tell you it's worth it, because while hard, it is the race that matters. And I would rather run a race that is difficult, that matters, than one that is easy, that doesn't. And I hope you feel the same. Let me pray for us. Father, with all that is set before us, with every obstacle that we feel weighing upon us right now in this moment, my prayer is this: give us the courage to do what is necessary. Give us the strength to run the race that you have called us to. Give us the endurance to not give up when it gets difficult. But let us understand deep within our hearts and deep within our souls that you have called us to run a race that matters. And so let us approach that with the intensity that the writer does of saying, I will strip off, I will lay aside every sin that trips us up, every weight that slows us down, because I'm running towards Jesus. And I want the life that he has promised me, even if that is more difficult than the life that I'm currently living. And so I will endure. Give us the courage. Give us the strength to endure in what you have called us to. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus.